Another thing that I was going to say when I look back here.
Is that a solar panel?
Just don't worry about it, Eric. Seriously, just stop worrying about it. What's up, everybody? Super stoked here. A lot riding on this first podcast, I feel, and it is the start of our third podventure, so you have that, and then the fact that we haven't done really an episode before on cars. And I've mentioned cars plenty of times in the podcast. If you've listened to our previous ones, I feel like I have a car reference in basically every single episode, regardless of its relevance to the topic at hand. But behind us, if you're watching on video or if you're just listening, we'll describe it, is a 2004 Subaru Forester XS that we purchased for this podventure for $1,200 off eBay.
Whew, $1,200.
Oh, yeah, I know. Big spenders over here. And so many of you may be wondering what the heck is going on. Where did my normal hunting and shooting related podcast go? But we actually will circle everything back around to those topics because the reason we got this thing, Mark, you can go into this better. Why do we have this? What are we going to be doing?
All right, here's the deal, Jim. We are going to be heading to Arizona to chase Coues deer with our bows. So I guess we're doing Subarus and bows. I don't know.
Subs and bows.
Yeah, subs and bows.
We'll be there this January. It's a really cool hunt. Never done it before. Read a lot about it. Know guys who have done it before.
Kind of like the St. Croix River hunt, but
yeah. Well, hopefully not.
Yeah, let's keep the similarities to a minimum.
Yep.
But so anyway, personally, I've hunted Coues deer twice. Both times during the early October season with a rifle. And the terrain there is very cool, very unique, very rocky. We ended up taking a pickup up a dry creek bed one time, so there's definitely some off-road aspects. But also another thing that's nice is having a very, I'd say, compact off-road capable vehicle. So we know some guys who have actually taken like old Suzuki Samurais, fixed them up.
Such a cool car.
Yes, and kind of turned them into like a mobile hunting rig, almost like a glorified side-by-side, if you will.
Because a lot of guys even just tow them. They don't even drive them out there. They just tow them.
Oh, yeah, that's that. He puts it on a flatbed or whatever, however he gets it out there, and brings it out there just like you would, your wheelers or side-by-side.
Buggy.
So,
yeah.
Which those side-by-sides, a modern-day side-by-side, Jim, those are expensive.
They are. That is the thing. Is I know that there's some out there where if you go super base model or maybe you find a used one, even still you're looking at a couple grand.
Oh, easily.
And, definitely more than what we paid for this thing behind us.
And you need an extra vehicle just to get it to where you're going.
Exactly. It's not a street legal thing. You can't drive it on the highway. And so that was kind of the idea behind getting this thing. And gosh, I have a list here because I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything because this is like my one big break, right? But anyway, so some people may be wondering, why did you get a Subaru in the case that you're going to be going on a hunt where you're going to be seeing a lot of off-road activity? Ordinarily, the choices there might be a truck or it might be something like a Jeep, a classic Wrangler.
I'm actually glad you're addressing this question, Jim, because I've got the same one.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. So a lot of people sort of glance over the Subaru when they're looking at an off-road capable vehicle. And the thing that people, I think, need to realize is that there's a couple different kinds of off-road. You have your rock crawling, which I think is probably if somebody said off-roading, I think a lot of people's minds probably immediately go to something more along the lines of rock crawling. Mm-hmm. Rock crawling is really slow speed and high obstacle or big time obstacles that you're going over.
Right.
It's your classic Moab, big giant Easterland safari or something like that, where you have people that are going down in these giant rocky pits and they're getting all kinds of articulation where one wheel is way up on some rock and another wheel is down in some huge ditch and they're rolling on 37s, and it's just these big hosses, right? And that is a really cool form of off-road, but I guess if you really boil it down and you look at the vehicles that are used in that sort of thing, now I know a lot of people do drive them on the highway, and so I'm not saying that you can't, But in our case, we're driving from Wisconsin down to Arizona, so we are going to be going a long way, quite the drive there. And then when we get there, I would say what we're going to be seeing more of, and this is based on, I haven't been to this particular location before, but I've tried looking at a lot of maps. I've gone off what you've described, Mark. It seems a lot more borderline trail or overlanding.
Yeah, I would say anything we encounter from, I'd say like going to be moderate.
Yes.
Nothing too extreme.
Right. And it gets to the point where, obviously your average minivan, as practical as they are and as much stuff as you can fit in them, probably not the vehicle you want to take. You need ground clearance. You need the ability to put power to all four wheels, which we'll get into because, of course, the Subaru has its legendary symmetrical all-wheel drive system that a lot of people know of. And but, yeah, in this case, we have to drive something across the country. And, a lot of those 4x4s that are sort of the quintessential rock crawlers, a lot of them are coming in with either real short wheelbases. So if you look at the, again, we'll go to the Wrangler. It's such a good example of a great off-roading vehicle. But you look at the Wrangler, and it's got a pretty short wheelbase. So that is the distance from the front wheels to the distance to the rear wheels, and that can tend to make a car a little bit more squirrely. Its road dynamics are not quite as smooth, a little bit less comfy. A lot of times, you're talking about a car that sits up higher too.
Which that's going to make the center of gravity higher, right? I mean,
it's going to make the center of gravity higher, yeah. Which is kind of, I think that was an issue probably with the older Jeeps. I remember people used to talk about. I used to drive a Jeep Wrangler in high school, and my mom was so worried I was going to flip the thing because she had remembered like the old CJs and stuff like that. Very, very top heavy vehicles. They were also very narrow too, which didn't help. But yeah, anytime you get that center of gravity outside the bounds of the wheels, that's when it's going to go.
Okay, gotcha.
Anyway, but yeah, they're a little bit more squirrely on the road, and the solid axles that a lot of times they'll have a solid axle in the rear and sometimes the front too. And a solid axle would be if you're ever looking at the back of a truck, which in our garage here right now, I am looking at the back of a truck, and underneath, connecting the two rear wheels, you'll see something that looks basically like a barbell you see at the weight room with a gigantic metal football in the middle of it. And that is a solid axle, whereas a car like the Subaru, for example, here, has independent suspension all around. And the independent suspension gets kind of poo-hooed because you don't necessarily get as much articulation because if you can imagine sort of wheel travel is important off-road because if you're going over obstacles and things like that, and like I said, articulating over big rocks or anything, you're stuck if you can't put power to the ground. And you can't put power to the ground if you don't have tires on the ground. And so if your suspension doesn't allow the wheels to stay on the ground, and sometimes you'll see cars that are off-road where they've gone in such a manner that they're three-wheeling it or sometimes even two-wheeling it, well, that's half your traction's gone, right? Yep. So anyway, some people poo-hoo the independent suspension because they think it has, and many times it does have less travel, but it rides nicer. Each wheel has its own individual, control arms, trailing arms, and it rides better. And actually, a lot of the desert runners, if you look at some of those crazy trophy trucks that run in the deserts at super high speeds, and they're going over all kinds of wallops and wops and stuff, a lot of times they have independent suspension all around.
Okay.
And that's because they're able to soak up each individual bump as it occurs and keep grip to the ground a lot better than they would if they were sort of bouncing around all over the place on solid axles. So anyway, that's what we're working with on the Subaru.
Well, you brought up one thing like a short wheelbase, and like I guess when I look at this thing, it appears to have a pretty short wheelbase. Is
definitely not the longest. But
is that going to be an advantage or?
An advantage when you're off-road, because the longer your wheelbase when you're off-road, the more chances you have to potentially high center yourself.
Okay.
So if you have a peak, if you will, that you're going over, it doesn't have to be the peak of a hill, but it could just be sort of a rock right there.
Yep.
If you have a shorter wheelbase, then you're able to get your front wheel over and then your rear wheel up onto it more quickly than you would if you were in a real long wheelbase thing that could have the chance to have the front wheel start going down and then, be scraping along the bottom and the center. Okay. And it's also just more maneuverable, too, because it's smaller. It's like a billy goat.
Yeah.
And even going off that, like I'm looking at it, and it looks like our suspension is probably not what originally came on it, and that's that is probably in part due to like that situation. You don't want to get high and centered on something. Is that kind of what you're going for there?
Yep, and you just want to be able to clear more things. So
Okay.
we did install a lift kit into this, and we're going to get into a lot of what we did and some of the things around working on your own car here too. But we've installed a lift kit on this thing. You can't go necessarily as high as you could with some trucks and Jeeps and stuff like that. Some of those guys will put on 5-inch,
Right.
6-inch lift kit. We just had to go with a 2.
Yeah.
But still, a Subaru Forester here, like the one we have behind us, a lot of people would be surprised, even from the factory, they have around 9 inches or so of ground clearance.
Yeah.
Which is surprisingly good.
We've got clearance.
Clearance. And, of
What's
course,
your vector, Victor?
yeah, we have all-wheel drive, which is pretty sweet. And Subaru's all-wheel drive is very unique. A lot of car manufacturers out there now have all-wheel drive. You'll see it in a lot of cars, even sedans, like 4-door regular sedans, cars and stuff. Will have all-wheel drive, but a lot of them are front-wheel drive based. So the car still is mostly front-wheel drive, but they'll call it like a slip and grip system. So basically the rear wheels are only engaged if they're needed.
Okay.
But most of the time the car is just kind of being a front-wheel drive car. Whereas with Subarus, the all wheels are always driven. And I know that's kind of gotten them some demerits in the gas mileage category because some of those other front-wheel drive-based all-wheel drive systems can sort of be a little bit more economical and only driving 2 wheels most of the time, but these ones drive 4 all the time. But it's really intelligent, though, and it allows the wheels to avoid slipping in all kinds of situations and just maintaining grip. There's 3 differentials in this car.
Wow.
So actually, in like a...
So 3, because generally you hear, at least what I hear is like you got a front and a rear differential.
Yeah, so with a 4-wheel drive car, you would have a front and rear differential. And
What
then,
is a differential?
So yeah, a differential is basically what it does. They call it a differential because it does the job of ensuring that. Oh, how do I explain it? Have you ever been in a car where you're in 4-wheel drive? And it's not snowy or slippery, and you start trying to turn real tight, and this car goes, right?
Yeah.
So that's because 4-wheel drive has a transfer case in the middle.
Okay.
So I'm going to get to differentials here in a second.
Yep.
Transfer case in the middle that distributes power to the 2 differentials that distribute power to the front and rear wheels. And the transfer case doesn't have the ability to do what differentials can, which is sort of, if you're making a left turn, let's say, your front left tire doesn't have as far to go as your front right tire, right? Your front right tire has to get way around, whereas your left front tire just has to kind of go, okay, left turn, easy peasy. That actually means that it's really strange when you think about it, but your right tire actually has to move faster than your left tire.
Okay.
Sure.
And the differential allows that to happen. That's kind of why it got its name.
So it differentiates the
difference.
speed of your independent wheels. Interesting. Yes. Okay.
And so you'll have that many times in like a 4-wheel drive car. You'll have it in the front and you'll have it in the rear.
Yeah.
And then the front is really only engaged with, if you ever heard of like locking hubs back in the day, you had to get out and actually twist a lock on the front wheels of your car.
My 79 Scout has locking hubs.
Yeah. A lot of times now they're auto locking, but then they'll lock everything in place to that differential. But when you're just in 2-wheel drive, it stays unlocked and it's almost like a rear-wheel drive car where those front wheels are just sort of along for the ride.
Do you have a 79 Scout?
Yeah, it's at my dad's house.
Oh.
Yeah, he does.
It's kind of in a state of it was so pristine,
just casually
and now
like,
it's like semi-destroyed, and it's a really sad deal. And I was actually trying to convince Jim that should be our vehicle of choice, because then he could fix my Scout back up.
Yes, I tell you what,
it was purely altruistic.
Yes,
I can fix a lot of stuff, but body work, it sounded like that thing's got some rust, and I
told you I got the new sides. I got brand new sides.
Yes, which involve some of them welding and cutting, which makes me nervous.
Okay, fair enough.
Timbers.
Back to Subaru.
But yeah, anyways, so crazy kind of thing. This thing has 3 differentials, so it actually has 1 in the front, 1 in the rear. And then if you're using, if you're in 4-wheel drive, the problem is, like I said, that transfer case, ordinarily, it's making sure that the front and rear wheels are locked together.
Yeah.
So even though the front left and front right wheel and tire can spin at different rates because of the differential, the actual front set of wheels and the rear set of wheels are locked together in a four-wheel drive via the transfer case.
Okay.
In an all-wheel drive car, like these Subarus, instead of a transfer case, it's a center differential.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the differential then also allows the front set of wheels and rear set of wheels to spin at different rates.
Okay.
So
Oh.
all the wheels individually can kind of be doing different things. It's a very, like I said, it's a very intelligent system. It's quite complex. Luckily, we didn't have to tear into the transmission or driveline much, aside from this engine that's behind us.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
probably put that back in at some
I'll be
point.
darned.
Probably. I dropped that in this weekend. So anyway, it's kind of crazy though, but you end up with a pretty cool system that's able to put a lot of power or enough power to all the wheels. You can get a lot of grip off road. I would suggest anybody, if you've been curious and you've been thinking to yourself, oh, I got to get a Jeep, I got to get a whatever. So I'd consider looking into the Subarus because and see what people have done with them as overland rigs. It's quite impressive. A lot of the forums out there, there's some people who are. I think we're going to be running something like a 31-inch tire or something like that. There's people putting bigger tires on. There's people putting bigger lifts. It's more involved process to do so with the suspension that these have, but they're pretty sweet little cars.
What's a cool spot to look at some of these cool Subarus, Jim?
So like SubaruForester.org is one. I've hung around on there a little bit and I've seen what people are working on. You have something, I can't remember all the names off the top of my head, but I know sometimes you'll hear Foresters referred to as Fozzies or Foz. You also have Outback forums, so the Outback kind of has a similar platform, and that's actually another thing that I should talk about too. This is another really cool thing about Subarus. It's probably the best thing if you're somebody who wants to work on your own vehicle, is that Subarus are they're almost like AR-15s, right? So
Triggered.
when you triggered, right? So let's consider. I got my first AR-15 back when I was 18, and that AR-15. And now I'm 25. I can swap in parts that I would get today in 2019, 7 years later.
Yep.
I can swap parts into that same exact AR-15 and encounter zero issues, right?
Right.
Pretty much the formula has remained unchanged. Subarus are essentially the same deal. And that's really nice for working on cars because it means that parts are easy to find, parts are relatively cheap, especially when you get into the aftermarket too, because aftermarket people don't want to go making different parts for different little individual vehicles all over the place because that means that the prospective amount of buyers that could buy each one of those parts gets smaller and smaller and smaller every time they become a smaller and smaller niche.
Okay.
Whereas with Subaru guys, I mean, you might make one part as an aftermarket person, an aftermarket parts manufacturer, and it might fit the Impreza from, 1998 to present. I can't say that for sure, but
Right.
That's kind of a maybe dramatic example. But they've been using essentially the same engine. It's called their EJ platform since the early 90s. Because I
Wild.
actually happen to have a 93 Legacy at home. It's the first car that I ever purchased myself with my own money.
Yeah.
I tore it apart entirely and was able to kind of swap in a motor from a 2006 Impreza. So you're talking about a 93 Legacy, 2006 Impreza motor, bolted right in.
Wow.
There's some other stuff that maybe took a little bit of massaging. Some of the electronics and things like that have been updated over time, so you can't always swap over computers and electronics and stuff like that. But the whole thing bolted right in, at least.
Yeah.
And I'm using a transmission out of the same car.
Holy
and
crap,
differential
that's wild.
and axles. The axles come out of a 2000. I think I got them out of a 2007 Impreza.
Wow.
So they're cool that way, and that also means. So now let's consider, and we'll go back to this idea of going on a hunt, going on an adventure. Think about if we had have gotten. I remember looking around online. I was looking at stuff like I love all the cool, unique old cars. So I'm looking at old 80s Isuzu Trooper 2s, right? That's a car that not many people have on the road anymore these days.
Right.
When's the last time you saw one of those? And imagine going out and about and driving across the country and having an issue and then trying to find parts.
Yeah.
Same with the Mitsubishi Monteros that I was looking at. I love the Mitsubishi Montero. It's a really cool SUV. Mitsubishi campaigned it at the Dakar, I believe, rally, and it won. It's such a cool SUV with such a cool history. And Again, though, how many Mitsubishi Monteros have you seen on the road? Not many. When I see one in a parking lot, I freak out.
Right.
So that means parts are going to be tough to find. Whereas you see Subarus everywhere, and they have so much in common with one another. So you might not have your mechanic that you stop by might not have a 2004 Subaru Forester lateral link in their inventory, but they might have a 2004 Legacy or Impreza lateral link, which actually could, don't quote me on this because I just brought that kind of out of my bum, but
Sure.
it could work. Or if you have maybe a more major issue like, let's say, engine failure or something like that, you could get it out of any number of Subarus.
Yeah.
So it's pretty wild how they work that way, and it does make, like I said, just finding parts and knowing that if you're out on the road and you need parts, it just makes it that much more.
Yeah, I mean, if you get in a bind, tough spot, something breaks down, the likelihood of a mechanic having a part on hand that you might need goes up.
Which is huge. Some of the other cars, just for fun, that we looked at a Chevy Blazer, so the old classic S10 Blazer.
Oh,
in fact, I actually got in a guy's car, a Subaru, and he drove me out to the farm where the S10 was located, and I was pretty close to buying it, and then I found a major rust problem on the leaf spring mount to the vehicle that he hadn't noticed before. Decided not to, and I had to ride with him all the way back to Vortex in his Subaru, which is actually where I got the idea to start looking into Subarus, because as we were driving back, he was a really nice guy, and he was like, "Oh man, I just didn't know that was there. I totally don't blame you." He had another guy who was interested. He's like, "I'm gonna have to tell that guy too. He's a real good guy." And he was like, "I tell you, he's like, I just can't have any luck with some of these other cars." He's like, "This Subaru is the only thing I've had a lot of luck with. It's reliable." He's like, "It's super easy to work on." That's another thing about these cars. Japanese cars, they're put together really quite well, and they make a lot of sense. Not as much sense, I'll say, as German cars, in my experience.
Okay.
German cars are put together in a very bland way that just makes sense, and it's not really that exciting, but it just works.
Sounds about right.
Japanese cars, they're put together in a way that works and makes pretty good sense, but sometimes you look at the things that they do and you're sort of like, that's a little intricate. Why did they feel they had to do that? Anyway, but he was complimenting how easy they are to work on. He said, he changed not a radiator, what's the other thing? The alternator. He changed an alternator in the AutoZone parking lot one time.
Yeah.
He said that it's just like very simple. And so as he was talking about it more, I remembered
Light
kind of
bulb.
in my searches going around on SubaruForester.org and whatnot. I was like, some people off-road these things.
I can just see all your light bulbs going off at the same time.
Yeah. Anyway, we also looked at a Mazda Navajo two-door, which is cool because this is another thing you can...
I'm Googling this now.
Yeah, well, when you
See
Google
this
it,
thing.
be prepared to not be that shocked because it's just a Ford Explorer. So...
And when Jim says we looked at these things, Eric and I would get text messages like, looking at a Mazda Navajo tonight. We're like, okay. And then I will say, like 3 days, this is like maybe a 2-week process, whatever. And then we got the text message, we got a Subaru.
Well,
or maybe it was we got a $1,200 Subaru. And
no, it was this bid is about to end. I might bid on it. And then it was like 5 minutes later, hey, we got it. It's ours.
Yep,
That's right.
that happened.
Which we'll get into that story.
We will. I did look at a Mazda Navajo, though. That would have been a really unique find because it is a Ford Explorer, but being in the Mazda trim, it makes it more rare and unique. But still, actually, it's one of those gems where it would be easy to find parts for.
Okay.
Because all the parts are just Ford Explorer parts. But you would have a really unique model in having the Mazda Navajo.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was a 5-speed. It was 4-wheel drive, 2-door. It was pretty neat. But
yeah, what was wrong with that one?
it was in Washington. Well, which actually means nothing's wrong with it because in Washington they have almost zero rust.
Right.
But it just would have been, you would have had to ship it all the way over here. And what they were asking for it, I think they were asking somewhere close to $3,000 for it, and then plus shipping, you're at $4,000 to $4,500. So anyway, I looked around at a number of different things. There's a number of different ways that you can purchase vehicles, and so I was of course doing the that happened to be on Auto Tempest. So Auto Tempest is a great website. It allows you to search eBay, Cars.com, CarSoup, Carvana, and Craigslists all over the country in one area. You can put in your filters how much you want it to cost, how many miles you want it to have, what transmission you want it to be, what body style you want it to be, what make and model you want it to be, what year range you want it to be, and then you can hit search, and it will search the entire country.
Amazing.
Wow.
And
It's like booking a flight of cars.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah, it is. It is very much that way. And some people get nervous about buying something that's far away, a little bit sight unseen. I've obviously we've done it. I've done it before too, and it is always a bit of a gamble. But you just understand that going into something, there's going to be issues. And I think that people get a little freaked out about cars. If they buy a new car or a new used car, or they buy something and it has a problem. I guess probably just because of a lack of complete understanding, and sometimes the sticker shock you get from certain mechanics when they give you the price on what it might cost to fix that issue. And I guess what you really need to consider is when you buy a vehicle, you're buying a tool with an assembly of an incredible amount of parts. So the chances that something are going to go wrong, especially when it's used, are they're definitely there. And so that's why kind of having an understanding of how to work on cars, which again we'll kind of get into that too, but it can really give you a little bit of peace of mind and understanding, when really just when something goes wrong, you understand what it is, what the consequences are, maybe how to fix it, or at least what it might cost to fix it, or something like that. But so I looked at Auto Tempest, checked out eBay, which Auto Tempest kind of brought into, but sometimes eBay, Auto Tempest will only bring up what you tell it to bring up.
Okay.
Whereas if you go to eBay, sometimes it'll just show you everything that's on eBay, right?
Okay.
Also checked out the local Craigslist, again, for the same reason that I checked out the eBay, because Auto Tempest will bring that up too, but Craigslist just gives you kind of everything you can check around. That was where I found the Isuzu Trooper too, and the owner said, completely rust-free Southern car. And when I showed up, the entire underneath was rust. And I actually wondered if he thought that the car from the factory underneath just came brown.
Okay.
Rust included.
Yeah, right, because every square inch of everything underneath was rust. And a lot of it was surface rust. I'll give him that. And but it was a lot. And then I opened up the door, and it has these weird little, plasticky kind of floors over top of the actual just floor, like the metal floor.
Even the plastic was rusted?
The plastic wasn't rusted, but it had a little hole in it. And I remember I pulled out like a little pick of sorts or something like that. And I pried up this little tear that I could see, because I was like, oh, moisture, I bet gets in there, and then it stays in there. And sure enough, there is a hair thin left of metal between just you seeing daylight through the floor. And I was like, hey, did you see this? Oh, no, I didn't see that. I'll knock off $100, no thanks.
You make a good bargain.
Yeah, I said, I'm not a welder. Even as much of a cool car as the Isuzu Trooper is.
It's like that Scooby-Doo car where you punch out the floor and you...
Yeah.
No, it's a Flintstones. Never mind.
Yeah, the
Scooby-Doo.
Flintstones car. Yeah. No, Scooby-Doo would be the Mystery Machine.
Yes, yep. Ooh, that might be a name.
Yeah, there you go. But anyway, so those are some of the areas that I looked, and when you're looking, you just got to be wary. People who write really good descriptions of vehicles are, generally speaking, that's what you want to look for in the description. Not even necessarily length, because a lot of car dealerships, for example, know that people think a longer description means that more time and thought was put into it. But if you ever look at like a used shady car dealership's description of a vehicle, and you actually start reading it, almost none of it is about the vehicle. Some of it will be a bunch of jargon about the dealership itself. Some of it will be just about random features the car has. And I'm not kidding you, they'll go so far as to explain, car has carpet, car has a driver's seat, car has a steering wheel. It's such things that don't even matter at all, but they just want to have a long description to make it look good. But, you want to look for somebody who actually took the time to write out the entire description. You definitely want to find somebody who admitted any faults that the car might have, admitted some of the good things that the car would have. You usually see like a good and bad section in ones that I'll look for. And, anybody the guy who we were about to buy the S10 Blazer from.
Right.
I remember looking at his description. He mentioned he fixed some stuff in the transmission, a couple of vacuum lines, just as preventative maintenance. That was basically almost a direct quote. And I remember thinking to myself, nobody goes in and replaces vacuum lines
as
preventative maintenance unless they know something. you know, and sure enough, and then I looked at his pictures, and in his pictures, it was in a shed, and there was a big air compressor in the background, and there was some sort of like tool chests in the background, and, you know, air hoses all over. And I remember thinking to myself, I bet this guy's a mechanic or a really big car enthusiast. And when he picked me up, we were driving over, he admitted that he used to be an ASE certified mechanic who owned his own shop. So, you know, you look for these kinds of things.
I was gonna say, it sounds like there's some cues you can look for, or, you know, at least be mindful or pay attention to, and
that's got to be a good thing, you know. Like that's a benefit. I mean, my dad's a carpenter, and he always talks about like when you're buying a house, like try to buy from some, you know, if you can get the background on the home and figure out like, okay, maybe this was a person who is handy.
It's huge.
It's the same. It applies to cars as well.
Yeah.
So.
And you always want to try and find, too, if they seem like they're trying to hide something. You know, they might have a lot of pictures, but for some reason, every picture, the rear left corner of the car is conveniently left out.
Yeah.
I bet there's a dent there.
Yeah.
A pretty big fender bender. Or if they're taking a bunch of pictures and they're avoiding any angles that might reveal the underside of the car, I bet there's a lot of rust.
Right, yep.
You know, stuff like that, you can really look into. And then when you actually show up, if you are able to do it in person, then you just want to start looking into lots of things. You know, you want to, I know a lot of people always say, you know, when you get there, here's how to properly test a car. You want to test drive it. You want to open up the engine. You want to bring all this testing equipment. And, I've always been, I know some people will probably yell at me. I've always been a little uncomfortable doing that, you know, because you kind of like, you show up and
you're ravaging.
Next thing you know, you're like pulling their whole car apart and it just feels funny.
right.
I usually generally will try and, I guess maybe that's why I've gravitated towards the cars I've gravitated towards. I basically buy a car knowing it'll have issues and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, so if I'm going to spend a lot of money on a car, then I'm probably going to be more comfortable doing some more of those tests because I feel like I'm more, it's more reasonable for me to want to do that. But a lot of the cars that I'm looking at are less than $2,000.
Right.
And so I purchase it actually just trying to find a good deal, usually on a good body that's fairly rust-free.
Right.
And then I'm just expecting, I'm like, because I didn't spend much in the car, if anything is good with the car, I'll consider it a win. And if anything is bad, I'll just consider it something I expected to have
Interesting.
happen.
Right. Well, let's get into because you definitely have a philosophy as it revolves around why you would buy a car like, say, for instance, a $1,200 Subaru.
Off eBay.
Yes.
Right. So, yeah, when I found this thing, I remember looking around at it, and actually it came from a used car dealership, and a rather shady one at that, I'll admit. And normally I would just completely ignore this thing, but at the price, it was a no-reserve auction, and at the price that it was at, when I saw it, it was at $800, no reserve, and there was, like, minutes left. And, of course, you know, you have a bunch of people watching a car like this, but they actually had pictures of the underside. They had pictures of the engine bay. That's another good thing to see. Not only just to see that there is an engine in there.
Okay. Yeah.
But
engine
sometimes,
included.
Sometimes an engine bay,
I wasn't listed in the description. Darn it.
An engine bay can be a good sort of X-ray view into a little bit of the underside of the car. You can see some things like rust. You can see some things like maybe previous history of an accident. If some stuff looks rather folded up in there, you know, if you see some bent metal.
Got a garage door.
We got a
opening,
garage door mysteriously, ghost opening. You know, but you can see some evidence there. So they had pictures of all that, and I remember thinking to myself, like, the actual body of this car doesn't look too bad. Now, the thing has 240,000 miles on it. Of course, they say with Subarus, one of the infamous things is their head gaskets. They blow head gaskets a lot, especially the older ones before Subaru apparently redesigned it. But, you know, that's something that can be fixed. It doesn't mean the end of the engine necessarily. But, of course, they say, the head gaskets were replaced, and so is the timing belt, which, if it was when we got this thing, it was a complete joke. But, you know, again, it's like I was looking around, and I couldn't see any rust, even on the pictures of the underside of the car, even in the pictures of the engine bay. And we were talking about a platform that's fairly proven. And I thought to myself, you know, if we can get this thing, I actually set in my mind, which is probably why I put this as my max bid, $1,200. I was like, that's the max. And if we get that car, I'm expecting things will be wrong with it. But if nothing's wrong with it, huge win. Or if certain things are really good about it, huge win. And if stuff goes wrong with it, then that just means we work on it. We were planning this out months ago, too. So this happened back a long time ago. And so anyway, kind of went that route. But like you said, Mark, so this is where my philosophy comes in, because looking around, let's say, again, we're sticking with the Subaru Forester here. I'm talking same vintage, maybe even a couple years newer, even potentially a little bit more base model, or even sometimes a little bit older. Anyway, same vintage Forester, even a more base model. I've seen them out there going for as high as $6,000. Actually,
Wow.
even a little higher at times for a real low mileage example. And when I say real low mileage, I'm talking about 50,000 miles. Because a car that's almost, 17 years old or something like that. Poor math, sorry, 16 years old.
Yeah. I don't do
Fooled me.
numbers.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was going to agree.
A car that's almost that old, if it has 50,000 miles on it, they didn't drive it a whole lot. That's
Right.
pretty impressive. And so anyways, but cars going for $6,000 to $8,000. And the thing is that when you buy a used car, there will be problems with it.
Right.
It is a used vehicle, especially if it's even if it's a low mileage but old vehicle.
Yep.
Rubber boots are going to be worn and cracked, because it doesn't matter how much you wear on those
Yeah.
rubber boots. It's just time deteriorates things. So you talk about CV axle boots, which are the axle that goes from the transmission and the differential to your wheels that actually drive the wheels.
Jeez, I thought we were talking about like lacrosse rubber boots.
Oh yeah, no. But those boots could get worn and cracked, and you don't want to get dirt and dust up into your CV joints, because then you start developing issues there. Your tie rod ends, your ball joints, stuff like that. Your bushings, rubber bushings that actually connect all the metal pieces together in your suspension. All those things can start to just deteriorate. So you even a low miles nice example could need those things.
Yeah.
So you're going to put in extra money into a vehicle no matter what, especially, too, if you're trying to build a purpose-built rig. So now let's consider, too, I would say full honesty, and I'm going to get into this, too, why I think it's important people be honest about what they, if they're trying to tell people and empower people to work on cars, they got to be honest with what it actually costs. We probably have about $8,000 to $9,000 in this car.
Okay.
Which I know sounds perhaps like a little bit much, right? You're thinking some relatively, quote, affordable, and of course, hashtag relatable out the window there, but, relatively, quote, affordable project. That's about how much we have into this. But if you look at it, if we were to get a, $6,000 Forester, the ones I was seeing out there for around 5 to 6 that were in decent condition, especially the body, as good as this one, they were all over 100,000 miles. I'm talking like 105 to 120,000 miles.
Okay.
And you got to realize that head gasket issue I was talking about a lot of times sets in around that $100,000 mark. Every time somebody
100,000 mile.
I'm sorry, yeah, not
That's a
100,000
lot of
mile.
dollars.
Yeah, that's a lot of dollars. 100,000 mile mark. Everybody's selling a car for a reason. Nobody just sells a car for absolutely no reason.
Yeah.
With an old car like that, chances are maybe their high school kid was driving it around and they're just hobbling it along. It seems like it's got a blown head gasket, something like that. And they're like, well, you know what? It's time to upgrade them.
Yeah.
It's a 16-year-old car. We'll dump it off, and then somebody else gets it, and whatever happens.
Yeah.
And so they're selling the car for a reason. And especially anything right around just over 100,000 miles on a lot of cars, that 100,000 mile mark is just where stuff starts to go wrong. And so you can bet if you see, I actually steer clear. I will look at cars that don't have quite 100,000 miles, or I'll look at cars that have way more than 100,000 miles. Because if they're just under, then they haven't had the 100,000 mile scaries yet.
Yeah.
And if they're way over, then somebody already took care of all that stuff, and now it's kind of back to normal.
That's a really good point. I sold I had a 2001 GMC Sierra that I sold at like 225,000 miles, and I regret selling that thing so much because if I was just somebody that knew vehicles a little bit better, the thing owes you absolutely nothing. I think I sold it for $2,000 or $2,500 at absolute tops. I could have just held on to that thing and, fixed whatever needed to be fixed. Like, let's say it needed leaf springs and it needed, it had some rust, but like you're going to get that on something with that many miles.
And in the Midwest.
Yeah, point being, like I could have kept that thing and, used that as like a hunting rig or whatever, and then just paid myself a truck payment for a year and then used that as a down payment.
Yeah. And so, like when you look at that too, So let's say again we get that $6,000 one. Chances are we're still going to have to put money in it to make it roadworthy enough. Because the other thing is too, we're going all the way to Arizona for a hunt that we have a tag for at one specific time too.
Right.
So we're not trying to just goof around on this locally. And
Yep.
whenever it breaks down, it's cool because we have a mechanic nearby. We don't want another Boats and Bows, right? Where we took the time and the energy and the effort out to go up, and then boom, something went wrong, and now we're SOL until a year later, right?
Right.
So that's the other thing, is that even if we got that car, we're going to put money into it to make sure it's down pat.
Yeah.
So if you can start with the lowest common denominator, again, like I said, maybe a $1,200 Subaru here in our case, and then go in and purpose build it for your particular scenario, I'm including, in my cost that I said, around $8,000 to $9,000 that we have into this thing, I'm including the car purchase itself. I'm including all the tools that we had to purchase to go into making this, and because there's a lot of tools you need. You need, I did bring some of my own, but we still had to get some long-handled wrenches. We had to get some specific sockets. You need an axle socket for to get the axle nut off, and these had a 32 millimeter. I didn't have a 32 millimeter. Certain different weird extensions and universal joints and specific Subaru parts and stuff like that and tools. So I'm including all the tools, a socket set. We just got one to have here too.
Right.
I'm including a bunch of recovery gear that we got, which we'll talk about too for off-road.
Yep.
And big knobby tires. I got not only 4 steel wheels with big knobby tires to go along with, oh, by the way, a lift kit that we got for it too. But I also got a 5th full-size spare wheel and tire.
Yeah.
We got a roof rack on this thing. We got some off-road lighting. We got, brand new suspension all the way around, brand new brakes all the way around, brand new brake calipers, brand new axles. We have a fully rebuilt short block engine, which is the engine minus the heads, and then we sent our heads off from the old engine to get rebuilt. So basically a 0 miles engine behind us.
Theoretically, a new engine.
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah. Fully rebuilt at the very least. And, we were able to do all this stuff for about that amount of money. If you're doing that to that same car that I discussed, you're basically putting the same amount of money we've put into this one, but on top of $6,000 instead of $1,200.
Yeah.
Right.
$1,200.
Right.
So you're pretty much saving yourself a fair amount of money. And plus, let's also look into, if this is your thing that you want to have as a hobby, right? Some people get another car, like a fun car as a hobby. I do enjoy driving fun cars, but I far more enjoy working on cars, like cars that are fun to work on.
Yeah.
Which is why I would never get a GM. Anyway, sorry. But I enjoy working on cars that are fun to work on. And so if I were to go out and get a car that's just fun to drive, that's reasonably inexpensive, I would have gone out and gotten a Miata.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Comb your hair over and go for it.
Yep.
Zoom.
Listen to my German EDM kind of. Anyway, but I'd have gotten that. I'd have gotten a used one. Wouldn't have been super expensive, but again, being a used car, there will be stuff that I'll have to do to fix it up and keep it running well and keep it being fun to drive. Because especially a sports car, when the bushings and the suspension gets bad, it's not as fun to drive. It's kind of roly-poly and whatnot. I'd have put a bunch of money into that, whereas with this thing, I can put in probably less money and still get something that I'm having a ton of fun with. I know inside and out. If we ever have an issue with this car, boom, I know the whole thing, front to back,
right,
bottom to top. Every single almost bolt in this thing has been turned by us. So anyway, that's
us very loosely.
Yeah. Well, I'll
the
be there.
you.
Thank you for
us.
the inclusion there, Jim.
It's the you and us.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's another thing that I think too is kind of if you want something that's fun, you want a project car, just start with the lowest common denominator. Try and find a rust-free body. You can find them down south on the West Coast, or if you're lucky, somewhere in the Midwest, just from somebody who garage kept it, and washed it really well.
And you're selling a lot of stuff that goes that it came in this thing, right? Like the existing wheels and tires.
So you can, that's another way you can save money too. Is all the money that we have in this, like we haven't sold anything off of it yet,
right?
But this was something I was considering, and actually, we can sell the wheels and tires because actually the Subaru wheels, they're OEM wheels.
Yeah.
They're not in like the most amazing shape ever, but I've seen them on eBay for $100 a pop.
Yeah.
So, you think to yourself, okay, well, that just paid for the socket set or the impact gun that I got, which is, oh my gosh,
and that's
get
assuming,
an impact gun.
And that's assuming that you don't already have it too. Like a socket set, probably, I would imagine people have at least a socket set.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, or it paid for the random weird wrenches and stuff that didn't come in the set, you know?
Yep.
Right.
And so, but you consider that, and that was just selling the wheels. And plus, if the tires are mounted to them and our tires still have reasonable tread left on them, you can sell them as a full set and then get even a little bit more money.
And I know you even talked about this. You got your aggressive tread here. Put those on when you're going on a hunting trip, and then when you're doing your daily driving around town, put your other tires back on.
That's another option too.
And then there was another thing on there that you were selling on the has a moonroof. And that motor you mentioned, that thing's
that's
worth
right.
some money.
That's right. So this is one you would want to have a backup plan for. Because if you take the moonroof out, then you have a giant hole in your car.
Yes.
But
I wonder what the windshield goes for.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you can ask Ricky Bobby.
Yes.
He'll tell you what a windshield is worth. Anyway, but you could, I remember, so on my Subaru Legacy, it is a bit of a, I guess, if you would, race car, so to speak.
It is a race car, Jim.
So anyway, but what we did was we essentially riveted an aluminum panel.
Yeah.
So that's what I had the shop do, is they riveted an aluminum panel over where the sunroof hole was, and they sealed it up and everything so rain wouldn't get in.
Yeah.
But the sunroof motor indeed goes for I remember finding a working sunroof motor going for, I think it was like $300.
Jeez.
Yeah. And if you take that out, it's like, okay, I just don't need to look out the top of my car. And I took it to some guy who has a rivet gun, and he put an aluminum sheet over the top of it for $100.
Yeah.
I came out $200 ahead.
Yeah.
And some of the real crazy ideas I started getting in my head that you could potentially do to save money or sort of make some money off of the old car and whatnot. I decided not to do this because I think this car will stay around for a while, and I'd like it to kind of look
like a car.
Not totally Mad Max, but let's look at the front and rear bumper cover. Every time anybody gets in a fender bender, boom, that plastic bumper cover snaps or cracks or whatever. Yep. And if you see it right now on the outside of the car, it's a green Subaru Forester, greenish tan. That front bumper and that rear bumper, they're not metal. You know, a lot of old time bumpers were all metal, but what we have nowadays is we have a crash bar that is metal, and it looks like a very old fashioned bumper. And then on the outside, they just put some plastic, nice looking thing. And that thing cracks if you bump it, like I said. And so if people get in a fender bender and then they want to sort of do a DIY fix, or they want to get a cheaper bumper than going to the OEM and buying a new unpainted one and then having to have it painted by a shop and put on, they might just go to eBay and try and find a used one.
Yeah.
Well, if we took that thing off, it doesn't make the car illegal to roll around without a plastic front bumper cover.
Yeah.
You can take it off and you can sell it to somebody who's looking to do that. Probably, well over $100, I would say you get it, because it's already painted and everything. Mm-hmm. You can sell that. You can sell the rear bumper cover. You could go in. This is another thought I had. The actual seats are pretty nice in this car. And we don't
needs those?
We don't really need nice seats for a hunting rig. So if you went to the junkyard, we actually have a U-Pole junkyard here locally, which is pretty unique. Not a lot of them exist anymore, but you're actually able to go in and you can talk to the people there. They know every single car, even though there's thousands there. They know every single one that's there. You could say, hey, you got any kind of 2002 to 2005 Foresters here?
Yeah.
They'd say, yeah, go over, to the Forester section or whatever. And you can go in. They have all these crummy old salvage cars sitting there, and you can just go in and grab some crummy old seats and buy them off the guy that's there at the junkyard. You'll probably get them for a song if you find just the crummiest ones. Like, hey, I bet nobody wants these. Can we have these? Or something like that. Or can I buy them from you for $50 or something?
Yeah.
Well, then go and sell your really nice ones that came in the car. Go and sell those for a couple $100, and you come out ahead.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the time I picked my own strawberries.
Yeah.
I guess so.
Except we just ate the strawberries.
Oh, okay.
They're delicious.
We're not going to eat the seeds.
No.
You can do that with any number of things. If you have a really nice, pretty-looking steering wheel, take your steering wheel off, go and buy a really chintzy,
piece of wood.
Old, not a piece of wood. You can find
old
another
2x4 will work.
You can find another one, but
Right.
maybe it's it's all worn down and the leather's kind of coming off.
Yep,
But who
yep.
cares? You just wrap it with duct tape, and you can sell yours for $100 or something. Basically, you can swap nice parts out, buy cheaper ones, and then sell your nicer ones essentially and come out ahead.
Right,
These are
right.
all things that you can do.
Yeah.
And that's, because we're building a vehicle of utility.
Very utility.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, no
Exactly. If
frills.
you're trying to make something nice, if you're trying to go for a full-on resto, then anything we're saying isn't going to apply.
Right. We're not winning a beauty pageant here.
Yeah.
Exactly. So those
We're
are
here
some
to collect
ways.
Coues deer souls, baby.
Those are some. Those are some ways that you can sort of come ahead. But anyway, I feel like I've been talking a lot, and I know, Mark, you were saying that you had some questions.
Well, I think you really answered a
else?
lot of them, and I asked a couple of them. And really, Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it, Jim.
So, like, one thing I do
Is that
think...
a solar panel?
Just don't worry about it, Eric. Okay, here's what... Oh, no, I did want to talk about this. This is important. So I've been a fan of the car industry for quite some time now.
Yes.
And...
Oh, I've got my question, but keep going.
Okay, just remember that. Remember that. I've been a fan of the car industry for quite some time now. I've followed along a lot of the big social media platforms, a lot of the big shops that are out there, seeing what they're doing. And a lot of the big stories that you see from people is anytime somebody took a $600 blank and rebuilt it and put in a fully blown V8 and raced a Pro-Am something and they won and they did it all for $1,500, so you can do it too. And I remember always thinking to myself, like, how in the hell are these people putting in a freaking roll cage?
Yeah.
They're putting in a blown V8. They're putting on new wheels and tires. They're doing all this stuff, welding, fabrication, new suspensions, and then somehow it still comes out with the price, the end bill coming in under $2,000.
Too good to be true.
And I just remember thinking to myself, this doesn't make any sense. And what it comes down to is that I've realized now over time that is a bit of a pipe dream for anybody who's just getting started. As much as I realize those stories are supposed to be inspiring to people who have never started before. Bless you.
Thank you.
They're supposed to be inspiring to people who have never worked on cars before. That, like, hey, you can do this too. No, you can't. Not yet.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this. This is like one of the only times that like an inspirational thing, bless you, or I don't know, maybe not an inspirational thing, but is going to come out saying, no, you can't. Just not yet.
Yeah.
Because what people fail to mention in those stories is that this person, maybe they got a car from a family friend, so the family friend just gave them a good deal, but that's not even the biggest thing. They already have a shop full of equipment, full of tools, every wrench in the book, impact guns, pneumatic tools. They have a full fabrication shop with a welder. They know how to weld.
Yeah.
They have a pipe bender tool to bend the pipe for their roll cage. They have a garage that they can go to that's massive. They have a buddy who knows how to tune an engine. They have, like all these hookups. They have a junkyard where they know the guy, so they got the engine block for free. And then they got sponsored for the heads, and then they did this stuff.
Yep.
And it's kind of like
We should have got sponsored.
I was just going to
should've.
say that.
it's like all the stars are already
God,
aligned.
the answer was in front of our face the whole time.
Get sponsored. That's the answer. All the stars are kind of already aligned for those folks. And so then I feel like it's just a little bit unfair when they go and they say, hey, we did this for $500, Like, I know I love the idea of the 24 Hours of Lemons. It's a super cool race where essentially the premise is that you have to do a similar race to the 24 Hours of Le Mans where you're just driving and driving and driving for 24 hours. You have multiple drivers that get in and out of the car. It's like this super exhausting, treacherous, grueling event, right? And they do it the 24 Hours of Lemons. So the idea is that you can't have spent a net of more than $500 on your car. You could get a car that was more than $500, but you'd have to sell enough parts off of it to then get back down to $500, or you could get a car that was maybe even cheaper than that somehow, and then just put in up to $500 or up to a total of $500 into it, including the actual purchase of the vehicle. And there's people who drive around the 24 Hours of Lemons, and I look at their cars. Like, there was a Porsche in there once. And I look at their cars sometimes where they're, like, really crazy. And they're awesome looking. People get so creative with all the stuff that they weld onto them, and they get all fancy. They make it look like a pirate ship driving around, that they've put onto the chassis of some old Mustang or something like that. And I look at that stuff, and I'm thinking to myself, there is no way in hell that there's $500 worth of stuff in that car.
No.
Because you have a person who's rolling around with 4 years of college, of schooling.
Yeah.
Of mechanic school or whatever. You have an ASE certified mechanic in there. Like, that degree wasn't free. That education wasn't free. You have somebody rolling around in there with stuff that they welded. The welding equipment wasn't free, or all the tools they used, or the 2-post, 4-post lift that they used, or the alignment machine that they had, or the spring compressor that they had for the new suspension, or the pneumatic tools, the air tools, the this, that, and the other thing, everything up and down, left, right, the engine hoist to take the engine out and put the new engine in, the engine stand. Yep. I mean, all these things, specialty tools, whatever. They all cost money. So once you actually have established yourself with, a bit of a garage, then in theory, you can use all those tools you've already bought to then probably make something that's overall pretty cheap.
Yep.
But your fixed cost still has to be there.
Right.
Mark, you were comparing, because we were talking about this, you were comparing it to hunting.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah. Well, because we talk about hunting Alaska. It's like, man, it doesn't have to be as expensive as you might, or it may not be as expensive as you think it's going to be, right? And I'm like, take a stick to blacktail hunt. You could do a road system hunt, and yeah, you've got your plane ticket and you've got your tags, but it's relatively inexpensive DIY hunt, right?
Like, what are we talking for? Tag costs like $300 to $400.
So yeah,
and a plane
a deer
ticket.
tag now is going to be $300, I think. Don't quote me. And then I think everything doubled the last couple of years. Actually, the tags in Alaska up until the last couple of years used to be really the only reasonable part of hunting that state. And and really, they haven't done anything wrong. Honestly, their tag prices are pretty much in line with anything else. They just kind of got with the times.
Right,
but
yeah.
unfortunately, it was that one thing you could point to when you went up there, like because the travel logistics and all, everything that goes into it is just kind of like elevated when it comes to cost, right? And it was like that one single thing you could point to. You're like, well, at least that's not that bad,
right? Yeah.
Anyway, now it is kind of, but deer tag's $300. License I think is $160, something like that. So
flight
still in the grand scheme, actually, when you look at an out-of-state deer tag,
not terrible,
not bad at all,
right?
But so you got your flight, you got your tag, you got your standard, your food, this, that, the other. But it's like, but I already have a bomb-ass tent. I already have a super sweet backpack.
Nice
I already
trekking
have
poles.
trekking poles.
Yeah.
I've got a camp stove. I've got, so it's almost like I've got the tools. I already own the tools.
You've got a headlamp, you've got a knife, you've got all the stuff.
For
you've
sure.
got the weapon, the ammo, the time into it, the optics. Oh my
gosh. Yeah, all of a sudden you're like ding, 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 ding. If somebody just wanted to, almost like where I'm at, right?
Yeah.
Looking at doing a vehicle project like that.
Yeah.
I'm the guy that's going, no, that's actually $20,000.
Yeah, Paul Neese already mentioned in our optics podcast, it's like when you're going to Alaska, get the nice optics, because you don't want to be in the middle of Alaska and just an absolute crap storm.
No.
And find out, man, I wish I would have gone up to the Razor.
Yeah, right.
Or something like that.
Not the place to find out.
It's not the place to find out.
You can certainly do it with that other stuff, but like you said,
exactly.
If you need everything you can get, you're...
Yeah. I don't mean to poo-hoo anybody that does use the Razor, but like I said, Paul Neese has been to Alaska plenty of times. You have too, and it's just, that's kind of how it works.
It's a tool you need. But anyway, so speaking, almost like tying into that, Jim, I look at what's going on here. I'm intrigued by it, right?
Yeah.
I am terrified. Right,
totally.
I look at this. Most of the part words that you've mentioned over the last, however long we've been talking, I don't know what those things are. Right.
Yeah.
So, for a person, like me who sees you doing this and going, man, that's pretty cool, and I like the idea of it. I like the philosophy. I like, in the end, and essentially, like I said, theoretically, we're going to have a super sweet hunting vehicle that should last a long time with some upkeep. But how do you start? Because I was actually shocked. I figured you'd been doing this your whole life. I thought you'd been working on cars since you were 10 or something, right?
Yeah. I've been nerding out over cars since I was 5.
Right. But actually working on cars kind of, I guess, I'll say at this level, or maybe doing projects like this or similar.
Yeah.
Not that long.
About 2.5 years.
So how do you, where do you start?
So one of the guys actually over here, and I was, we are in what we call Building D at Vortex. We're on the Vortex campus, if you will. And this is one of our warehouses. Conveniently enough, there was an open space over here amongst all of our sort of work vans and stuff like that go around to different shows and retailers. So anyways, our maintenance crew is kind of over here. And so one of the guys was over and he was watching me as I was cussing something out on the car. And, I remember I had put in the... So you have your spindles, which essentially connect to a lot of the suspension parts.
I think we've got them on our railing.
But then they also have the hub, which are where the bolts that your lug nuts go onto.
Okay.
Come out from. Anyway,
I know that word.
Anyway, I had put it on in the wrong order, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, man, I really effed this up. I'm just gonna have to get a whole new, thing or whatever. So I'm sitting there cussing it out, and I'm wondering if I could do anything to fix it, and I really couldn't reverse what I had done. And he comes over and he goes, yeah. A couple of the guys around here that are maintenance guys are also big car junkies. They work on their own cars. In fact, this guy I was talking to is rebuilding his own like 34 Ford, I think, or something like that.
Oh, wow.
Hot rod style.
Jeez, cool.
Louis, who's helped me a little bit on certain things. He's a big-time, amazing motorcycle mechanic. Anyway, so those guys are chatting, and he comes up and he goes, yeah, we had all the same problems you did. We all made the same mistakes you've made. You know, we've been seeing you make here and there at one point in time. And he said, if you want to learn something, there's basically two, and I'll add in a third ways that you can go. The one that not many people have the luxury of having is you can go the route where you have somebody that you know well, a friend or a close family member, that already knows how to do it all and can raise you, teaching you how to do it.
Right.
That is the holy grail of, you know, all these different means. The other two are, you can either pay someone a lot of money to teach you how to do it and do it really well, or you can just get your hands dirty and go in and start doing it, and you're probably going to screw up enough that you end up paying about the same amount of money fixing your mistakes as you would have had you paid somebody a lot of money to teach you how to do it, but at least you learn the hard way, and you're never going to make those mistakes again.
Yep.
Jim, it's so funny because how you always draw car references, I tend to draw hunting references. Those three things, the way you describe them, are really the three ways a
totally
person
parallel.
can get into hunting that hasn't hunted before.
Yeah.
And like you said, holy grail, a parent or, you know, loved one or mentor or family member, whatever that person is, taking you under their wing and just showing you the ropes from day one.
Yeah.
And then you've got, you know, maybe hiring a
school.
guide.
Yeah.
Or just getting your hands dirty.
That's the truth. So anyway, yeah, like I said, I started with this like about 2.5 years ago. The first car I worked on, I don't have it anymore, and I kick myself every day for not having this car anymore. It was an 87 Honda Civic SI. That is the first year Honda ever brought the SI badge to the Civic nameplate. And obviously the physical car wasn't the first one, but it was so good. It was so cool and so fun. And I got that car, and I was determined. I was like, this is the first car I'm going to get that I work on. So I got like an oil catch pan, you know, to change the oil myself. I went out, I got like the oil filter and the drain plug and the crush washer and, you know, some stuff like that. Just some little things to kind of do a few things myself. I got like a basic socket kit from Menards and a couple other random little bits and bobs. It's good to have some different kind of pliers and cutters and stuff like that. So I went in there and I opened this engine bay up and I'm looking at it. And like I said, I've nerded out over cars my entire life, but I'm opening up an engine bay now, when's the last time you opened your engine bay? Do you even know what the inside of it looks like?
No.
What's the engine bay?
Not enough people actually do this. Just, honestly, just look under there.
I mean,
once
are
in
you
a while.
talking about like popping the hood and just looking in?
Yeah.
Oh, I do that.
I've done
Sometimes.
that.
I mean,
probably like when you had to jump somebody in a
Yeah, or,
parking
you know,
lot.
wash
with-
your fluid or-
electrically, not like
You know,
pummel them,
Yeah.
rob them. But anyway.
you don't know that.
So anyway, but, you know, I pop the hood, and I'm kind of looking under there, and I'm like, wow, this is actually, like, pretty crazy. And I start kind of just trying to figure out, I'm not an engineer, but I enjoy trying to figure out how engineers' minds work, right? So I didn't just looking at it and trying to figure out, like, well, I know all these things about, like, 4-cylinder engines, and I know that this one's transversely mounted, which means it's mounted side to side or whatever, because I'd heard that before in magazines, you know, and stuff like that, or you read about it on the spec sheet or something, you know, and I know it's a manual transmission, and you just kind of start looking around. You're like, well, okay, the driver sits there, and the steering wheel is there, so how does the steering wheel connect to these front wheels? And then you look around with a flashlight, and you're like, well, there's a shaft coming out of the firewall, which is the wall between the engine bay and where the passengers sit. I'm like, well, there's a shaft coming out of there that goes right down to this thing, and I bet you that thing is what everybody calls the steering rack, you know. And then you go underneath, and you're like, sure enough, this rod that goes to the thing that holds the wheels, this rod is connected to that thing that shaft is going into. So I'm like, this is the steering assembly. And then you're like, okay, well, what else can I find? And then you start looking up online, or you get a service manual. That's a huge thing. A service manual is way more than the owner's manual.
Actually read that.
Yes, and it actually like the owner's manual will tell you, like, here's how you change the oil. The service manual will tell you, here's how you pull the engine and rebuild the whole engine. And so you pull that thing out, and then you start looking, and you're like, okay, let me try and find where the transmission is. And you're like, well, there it is. It's connected to the engine, and here's where you fill up the transmission fluid. And I bet you somehow the transmission has to get back to that little stick shift thing in the car. So where's the linkage for that? And so you just start playing these kind of games, and you just patience is really the big thing.
It's almost like a lot of anatomy.
It is, and you kind of can figure it out.
Vehicular anatomy.
And
Yes.
in the end, the scariest part is just to start unbolting things, because once it's unbolted, it's hard to get back in. But if you just kind of start with kind of easy things, right? So like change your oil, change the air filter, change the fuel filter. In a lot of cars, the fuel filter actually isn't that hard to get to. It's just kind of in the engine bay. It's up in one of the probably far corners of the engine bay. It's like a couple of bolts. You might get a little gasoline on you, but I remember that was like one of the coolest things I'd ever done, because I was like, this is more than just changing the oil of the air filter. I was like, I'm actually changing a fuel filter, and then I kind of started I was like, well, I'll change the spark plugs, and then you take something apart and you unscrew the spark plugs and you're like, well, I better put it back in now, or else I'm not going to have anything. I can't drive the car, which is why it's nice to experiment on this, not on your daily driver,
Right.
I will say.
Right.
But it's like you just kind of start figuring more and more stuff out. I took the wheels off and I was like, you know what? Gosh darn it, I'm going to change the brakes. And there I was sitting. I was getting brake lube all over myself, and I was getting, the dirty brake dust all over my hands, which doesn't come out for a very long time. And I'm fumbling around with pads and, all this stuff. And then, but you just kind of figure it out, right? And you screw something up, and then you have to go buy a new part at AutoZone. Like I said, that's why it's nice to have a different vehicle that's your daily.
Right.
Because otherwise you can't drive the car that you have in pieces. But you screw it up, you go there, you talk to the guy behind the counter, you're like, hey, yeah, I got to get one of these. Maybe he remembers you, and he's like, oh, man, what happened? You're like, well, I screwed this up. And then he might tell you, like, well, here's how you do it. Or you might look it up on a forum. And I would highly suggest, too, this is another really important thing that I forgot to mention as well. Make friends with a local shop who specializes in these kinds of vehicles that you're working on, whatever kind of vehicle it is that you're working on. And I'm not even talking about the dealership. I don't have a problem with dealerships. A lot of people talk about the dealerships as though they're like Satan, like stealerships. That's what they call them. But they're really not always that bad. I think, sometimes their parts are more expensive, but they're always carrying the OEM quality part, not an aftermarket that might break on you that's of unknown quality. Anyway, but you never know who you're going to get at the dealership. You go into the parts counter, it's this guy on Mondays, and then a different guy on Wednesdays, or you kind of you never know what you're going to get. They have a system set up. But when you go to a small independent shop, and especially, like I said, one that specializes in your kind of vehicle, we have one here. It's called Foreign Car Specialist. I know the guy. He happens to be the guy who works on the car, and he's also the guy who owns the business. And you walk in, and then he's got a guy who also kind of helps him back in the shop, but also helps man the front desk. And I know him real well. We're all on a first name basis. I can go in and chat with those guys, and they can order parts for me. They know that I'm gonna do as much of the work as I can myself, and they actually love that. Even though it means them getting less business, they are stoked to see, like, when I come in there, I'm like, hey, guys, I'm working on, I remember I told them, I was like, I got this 2004 Subaru Forester, I'm going to rebuild it, like I did on that other car that, whatever. And I was like, I'm going to rebuild this thing, so I was going to go to you guys for some parts. They're still getting the business of you coming in, and I'm still going to take it to them when this thing's all done to ask them for their 2-hour inspection to look it all over.
Okay,
it's got to go all the way to Arizona, But like, they're happy to do that stuff.
I've got a parallel.
Yeah.
The scene in Gran Torino where Clint Eastwood walks his little mentee into the barber shop and he has him ask for a haircut.
Yeah.
That is the parallel between developing that relationship with the parts guy.
Yeah.
Just in a less language kind of way.
And I call them up. I call them up a lot too.
Yeah.
So like, I'll be sitting outside the car, frustrated, and I'll be like, oh yeah. I'll come up and say, hey, Doug, it's Jimmy over here. I got that 2004 Forester. He said, oh, yeah, Jimmy, what's up? I'll say, hey, I can't figure out how to get this thing to line up or how to get this bolt on, and then he'll tell me how to do it, over the phone.
Right.
And it's because I have gone to them for business before, so I'm not just totally using them, and they know that.
Right.
But it's really nice.
It's the same thing as like if you go to your local archery shop repeatedly.
Yes.
No different. Or your gunsmith or whatever.
You build a rapport.
Yeah.
And
it is.
Trust and respect.
And the other thing is those guys, they're car enthusiasts.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be in this if they weren't, right?
For sure.
Yep.
And they wanted to get into a business that involved their hobby, right? And so what the thing is, you have to understand that their job is stressful too. Everybody goes into a shop and they're always really nervous. Like, oh man, is this guy going to try and screw me over? And they go in ready for a fight.
Almost defensive, yeah.
Very defensive, right? And the car shop knows this. They know their reputation. Or not even necessarily their shop's reputation, but just all mechanics'
Right, as a whole.
reputations. And so they know that. So they're coming into it like, oh my gosh, I hope this person isn't going to try and put up some giant fight with me. You know, it's like the person comes in and the mechanic might see it and they're like, oh man, I know that they're going to need a new axle. But if I tell them that, my cost on the part is $120.
Yeah.
I'm going to quote them for my cost on the part plus the labor that it's going to take me. It might even still only take me 30 minutes, but then if I'm quoting them at, you know, whatever it takes to keep the lights on around here, they might think I'm ripping them off.
Yeah.
And so they're always real nervous about, you know, whatever. So what I found is, like, when I go into a mechanic, first off, I look up a lot of the reviews, and the foreign car specialist guys had really good reviews. A lot of people, you know, said that they love the guys there. And so, you know, I just kind of went in. I felt them out a little bit, too. You can kind of tell when people are a little shady. It's just, you know, it's kind of one of those human nature things.
Right.
You sort of tell when someone's not really kind of seedy.
Yeah.
But I went in, these guys seemed like great people. I was asking them some questions. You know, I said, hey, it sounds like you specialize in, you know, X, Y, Z. Even though you do all foreign cars, you specialize, like, he really specialized in BMWs. That's like, he loves BMWs. So I went in and I started talking to him about BMWs, you know, or like, hey, what's your favorite one? You just ask them simple questions, right? And they,
Break
you know,
the ice a little.
it's not the first thing you ask them. You know, usually say like, hey, I have something I think I'm going to need some work on. Do you think you could do it? And, you
Hey,
know,
what's your favorite thing?
yeah, it's not like you walk in the door and say, hey, what's your favorite car? But, you know, you just have conversations with them. And what
I've got a lot of feelings. Do you have feelings?
Yeah. What I found is, like, when they quote you on the first job that they do for you, it's like, don't fight them on it. You know, don't start going through their itemized list and saying, I don't think you're quoting me right on that. I don't think it'd actually take you that many hours. Because then the person's going to just think every time you come into my shop, you're going to nitpick me on $5 worth. You know, it's like, I don't want to deal with this guy. But what I found with those guys is the first time they gave me a quote, I said, cool, let's do it. And I remember they were taken aback a little bit. And they were like, okay, yeah. Can you get it in, like, tomorrow? I was like, yeah, I'll have it here. When's the best time for you? Like, how can I make it easier for you to have me bring this car? And they were like, well, actually, if you bring it over here and then drop it off and put the key in this box, you know, like, that'll work. And I'm like, cool, I'll do it. I did it exactly the way they wanted to. I even asked them, I was like, do you want me to bring this along? Do you want me to do whatever? And they're like, oh, yeah, that'd be really helpful. Or, no, that's not necessary. Well, anyway, you do that stuff. And the next thing you know, it's like, you find yourself coming into their shop. The other day I ran in, I was like, I really need a drain plug. Like, we're trying to get this thing done as soon as possible. I stripped out the drain plug. I was able to get it out, but I really need a new one. He's like, we have one here. It's like, I'm about to close up, but just take this. I'll add it to your next bill, whatever.
Yeah, right.
You're never getting that at the dealership. The dealership has a computer system. They have to log that part is out and all this stuff. But that guy's a small shop. He can do that kind of stuff where it's like, hey, yeah, you know what? Put it on your tab.
When he likes you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And then the next time, you know, that he did something, I remember actually when I brought my car into that guy the first time, it was when he gave me that first quote and I said, okay, cool, thumbs up. I remember when I got it back, he detailed it.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, I remember, and he even filled up the gas. And I told him, I was like, my gas was on empty when I brought this in. And he was like, oh, well, you know, that's just, I just wanted to provide good service. And I was like, well, I'm coming back to you. And then I do. And you show them that you appreciate what they do, and then they show you that they appreciate your business. And it's a good relationship. But so many people are freaked out so much about getting ripped off that they already have severed the potential relationship they could have with the shop before they even walk in the door.
It's interesting how there are, like, you know, businesses or things that, you know, fall into a certain category, like whatever. You go buy and I'm not picking on these guys, but you go buy a coffee at Starbucks, it's a $5 coffee. I don't try to haggle over the price or tell them.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I know they probably don't have $5 into that cup of coffee, but
it's like when you go to the grocery
I just accept
store.
it. I just accept it. Like,
Right.
it is what it is.
Barter with the kid at the cash register.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and it's funny how so many people go in, they don't know anything about cars. That's why they took it into the shop. And then next thing you know, they get quoted on a price. They're like, that can't be right. It's like, well, what do you know?
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, well, and as you start to do more stuff yourself, you can kind of get a feel for, well, I know the OEM quality part might be worth this much. So I can see that when he quoted me for that, that's what I saw it for when I went on Subaru's website. You know, that's the right cost. But even still, you know, if you don't know that stuff, it's like, try and get a feel for them. Some of them will try and rip you off. I'm not saying there's not bad mechanics out there. But, you know, have that good relationship. But you can save a ton of money, though, when you do it yourself.
Yeah.
I know we were discussing, too, like, we have maybe 8 to 9 into this vehicle with everything we've done to it. Had we have had a mechanic do everything we've done to this car, we're looking at easily double. Yeah. Easily double.
So, Jim, as we look behind us here, right, and as actually, it's looking a lot better. A lot better.
Yeah.
It's starting to look like a car again, right?
Yeah.
But throughout this process, honestly, like at times, it's looked like we took a stick of dynamite, lit it, put it under the car, and then said, all right, let's put this thing back together.
Oh, there's crap everywhere. I started out with the best intentions of staying organized, and that just degraded immediately.
So my question is, though, like as you take things apart, right? Obviously, there's, almost like a lot of, I guess, what I'd describe as maybe incorrectly, like assemblies, right?
Yes.
Like this thing connects to this thing, connects to this thing, that
Yes.
makes a single thing. How do you keep track of those things? And is there anything you do along the way? Do you take pictures before and after?
Oh,
like,
yeah, I'm glad
what
you
types of
mentioned
things
this.
do you do to make sure that things go back the way they are supposed to?
I'm glad you mentioned this. If I'm ever going to take anything apart, instead of first looking up how to take this apart, I first look up how to put it back together. And if the process of putting it back together looks like something I can't do, I won't take it apart.
That makes
But
sense.
if the process of putting it together looks like something that's pretty simple, then I'll go into, okay, now how do I take it apart?
Okay.
So that's an important thing. But also, like, the whole car is held together with nuts and bolts. Most of the stuff that isn't a nut or bolt, like, you can't go in and just, like, take it apart. I mean, like, you can replace control arms, you can replace suspension and stuff like that, but in the end, everything is held together with nuts and bolts. And so it's kind of like, really, the main thing you have to keep track of is the nuts and bolts. And take a picture of the entire assembly, like you said, Mark. That's the one thing that I've always done, is take as many pictures from every single angle. I have entire albums in my phone of hundreds of pictures, because inevitably, when I would first only start out taking like 3 pictures, the one corner of the assembly that I needed to know how it went back together wasn't in any of my pictures. So I take a picture like every 1 degree of the entire 360 degrees around,
Yeah.
But then take a lot of pictures. When you pull it apart, I have a system of plastic baggies and Post-it notes. I'll write on the Post-it note, this is from the passenger side, strut to spindle, like bolt. Mm-hmm. Or something like that. Or in the engine bay, I'd say, like, these are the intake to head bolts. These are the distributor to intake manifold bolts. These are the timing belt cover bolts. These are the whatever bolts. And then you stick them in a plastic bag. You put that Post-it note that you wrote on in the plastic bag with it, seal it up, and set it aside. And then that way everything is easy to remember where it went.
Gotcha.
So
I know. Also, you were saying something earlier. I'm trying to remember what it was. Like, if there's something that you need to do on one side of the car.
Oh, yeah, this is another
right.
important thing.
You do it on the other side. Or wait, what side?
We'll make this one of our last things, because I know MC Ryan's flashing the well over an hour sign at me.
Oh, jeez.
But he's good at that. But anyway, so one thing I'll do is that it's really easy for people to just go and take everything apart all at once. Either you take everything apart all at once, or a lot of people think they should go front first, then back. What I actually prefer to do is split the car down long-wise and do the entire hot dog style. Do the entire passenger side.
I get it.
Yeah.
Do the entire passenger side first, and then when the passenger side is completely done, then do the driver's side.
Why?
Because you'll always have a finished product mirror of everything that you're working on one side if you're doing it side by side, passenger side and driver's side. If you do it front and back, if I take the entire front apart, I can't go to the back and say, oh, how did this go back together?
Oh.
The back is completely different. Or if I
Yeah.
take the back all apart, the front's completely different. It has steering components. It has all kinds of stuff. So if I instead take the entire right side of the car apart, and I'm going to put the front passenger side wheels and suspension back together, I might say, oh, crap, I don't remember how this goes back together. I can just go over to the driver's side, and it's still together, and I can say, oh, yeah, that's right. That's how that worked. And then I can assemble. And once that's complete, so now it is now a representation of, if I get lost on the driver's side, what I need to do.
Gotcha.
Once that's complete, then I'll go to the other side.
Gotcha.
So that's how I work it out. But yeah, only other thing I'll say, too, is shop around, too, for parts. Sometimes you would think that the discount auto parts store has the cheapest part, whereas you would be surprised. Occasionally, the dealership will have the cheaper part. So I remember when we were looking for an oil pump. Online, they wanted like $350 for an oil pump. Dealership wanted $120
Kidding me.
for an OEM Subaru oil pump versus some aftermarket Beck and Arnley or whatever oil pump. I was like, I'll take the Subaru one for half the price, whatever.
I mean, that's significant.
Significant, very much. So always shop around for parts when you can. See what the online people have. Parts Geek is one that I've gone to a lot. So see what they've got. See what your Subaru dealership has. But then also see what your local guy can acquire too, because he has his own means and methods of getting certain things, and they can usually get it pretty quick. If I call up, Doug at Foreign Car, I really want to give them a shout out because they've been awesome. But if I call those guys up, a lot of times if I call him in the morning, he'll have it same day because he has parts that get delivered every single day for the cars they're working on. And if he can just add my part to the truck, boom, he'll have it same day. That afternoon, I can go pick up the part.
Wild.
It's pretty cool.
What else? What else do we have to do with this thing?
Oh, man. I guess, I don't know. We just got to put the engine back in, and the suspension's all put back together. But I think we got to go do a little tour around. So MC Ryan's going to hook us up with a bit of a mobile setup here, and then we're going to walk around the car and explain what we've got going on. All right, everybody, we have quickly transitioned now over to actually the car now. We're no longer sitting in our seats. And for those of you listening, we'll still try and describe this as well as possible, but consider checking it out on YouTube a little bit later. Right now, behind us, we have our EJ251. Mark and Erik are completely lost in the cords of our headsets right now. We have our EJ251 motor from Subaru, and this was the first time, guys, I got to admit, that I have ever actually gone this deep in a project by actually taking the motor out of the vehicle. And again, you'll kind of get into, and as we walk around, you'll see some of the specific tools needed. If you're planning to take the motor out, you're going to need some means of holding it, and it's nice to have it kind of held out in space so you can get to all parts of it. These motor or engine stands are relatively inexpensive. They're probably not as expensive as you'd think. I'd say you could probably find a decent one for smaller motors like this for maybe even under $100. But they allow you to move the motor around. By taking out the lock, we can literally flip the entire engine upside down. If we got to get to the oil pan or we got to get to exhaust bolts and stuff like that. So it is nice to be able to have this when we put the new heads on. This is a boxer engine, actually.
What does that mean, Jim?
So that means rather than a V, where the cylinders are moving in a rather V fashion, or an I motor, where all the cylinders are directly in line with one another. Speaking of those Jeep Wranglers earlier, they have a legendary I6 motor, the 4.0. Anyway, what we have is an H pattern. So the crankshaft and everything about the big, dumb, moving metal pieces that move in a big circle are in the middle, and the cylinders actually go directly out to the sides. You know who else has a motor like that? Porsche.
Oh, so we're basically...
So we basically have a far more affordable all-wheel drive Porsche. Anyway, so it's kind of a unique motor, though, but this engine stand allowed us to get to all sides of it relatively easily.
And you've been able to move it around.
Yeah, wheels around.
As needed.
So we also have an engine hoist. It's over there somewhere. We're borrowing it from Louis here, one of the maintenance guys. But you can see some more of the kind of specific tools that we've got going on here. And I do apologize. Like I said, I had the best intentions of keeping this workspace relatively organized, but that goes out the window rather fast when you have You ever see the movie 300?
Yeah.
When basically everybody's running at each other, and then just all of a sudden they all just clash, and there's just swords fighting all over the place, and arrows flying, and the sky goes black.
Yeah.
That's what it's like when you have a lineup of new parts and you have all the old parts on the vehicle. You think everything's going to stay really organized, but all of a sudden the new parts and the old parts clash, and they all mix together, and you can't remember where anything is.
Yep.
That's all stuff that, as you build up your tool repertoire, you'll start to have.
Don't tip over the urine.
Here's my big Kirkland jug of brake fluid, even though it looks like urine. As we struggle here a little bit more, we have all kinds of different socket sets. I've got half-inch extensions that are really long, universal joints that allow you to get to bolts that are kind of hard to get to.
This would work for pulling the brains out of that thing.
Yeah. That is a hose clamp plier.
Wow.
So got a set of hose clamp pliers. Over here, for the impact gun that we have, I highly recommend getting an impact gun, especially a half-inch one. It's going to let you get a lot of those really hard bolts. Whereas ordinarily, what I did before I ever bought an impact gun, which I went about a year, you got to get a breaker bar, which is just essentially like a non-ratcheting giant socket that is really long-handled, so you can get a lot of leverage. But it's not always easy to get into tight places, whereas an impact gun is smaller and you can get into tight places. So but you need specific sockets just for an impact gun. It can't just use a regular socket. Well, it can, but it's not always good for those sockets.
What do we got going on here?
Oh, that is a fluid transfer sort of deal that I got for putting the diff fluid in. Differential fluid is kind of difficult to get the fluid in there because a lot of times the holes are facing directly outward.
Yeah.
Instead of, a lot of times when you fill up something, the hole is facing up. So you
Right.
put a funnel in and pour it right in.
Right.
But on a differential, the plugs and the drain fillers and stuff are facing directly out to the side, so you need to get some sort of like a hose mechanism and a little pump. I just got that.
because you don't necessarily have gravity working in your favor, so you
Yeah.
actually have to use
Yeah,
a pump
that
to
was
get it
that
in.
was relatively inexpensive. I just got it at O'Reilly's.
Wow.
But yeah, you wind up kind of finding yourself in some precarious positions, trying to work a lot of these things. It's a great workout too. Working on cars, great workout. You wind up with like that farm kid strength. If you ever had those kids in high school that
you
are
can
like
huck bales,
they don't
baby.
look crazy strong,
Yep.
but they just are. They're like solid as a rock.
Yep.
Like I thought I worked out, and then I started working on cars, and it's like when you're contorted around a brake assembly and you're trying to get to a control arm and like wriggle it free out of all the rust and
Yeah.
rubber bushings that are holding it in, you get a good workout in.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, as you can see, one other thing that we have kind of limited space over here. We didn't want to take up the entire warehouse. So we've actually used the inside of the vehicle as a tool chest. I did this in the past. I know some people have space limitations. Maybe their garage isn't big enough to house a project car. I actually just used a 10 by 20 storage unit. It was pretty cheap, monthly payment, and I kept my car in there. And it wasn't ideal, but I was able to work on everything. You know, jack stands don't require any electricity. The jack itself, the floor jack, doesn't require any electricity as long as you can get the car up.
Yeah.
You know, sockets and things like that. I was able to work on a car. That old Subaru I mentioned in a storage unit. But what I did was utilize the inside of the vehicle as a toolbox, so I didn't have to have tools laying all around. Which, as you can see now, tools are everywhere. But like I said, I started out with the best intention of using the inside of the vehicle.
It's the thought that counts.
Yeah, the rear seats have been removed. We might keep one for Erik.
Hopefully,
We might.
that would be
optional.
swell.
But that allows a little bit more space inside the vehicle. Tons of room in the back. The Forester's a pretty
Just
roomy.
put me on the roof. I'll be
Forester has a
fine.
pretty roomy back end. Like you said, yes,
have
we do
you ever
have.
seen the original Vacation?
Yeah,
We do
They
have
go to
the,
Arizona.
yeah.
we do have the
Ended
roof
well
rack.
for them.
This is a 5-speed manual. Mark and Erik.
Oh,
That'll
yeah.
be that'll be another one of the things
Oh.
we wind up learning, you guys. Let's head on over to the engine bay here.
Jim, I'll
Oh,
follow
here's that
you.
breaker bar I mentioned earlier. Another thing
Oh,
that
that's
you're
what
gonna
we used the one time to do the thing.
Yep. Another
Yeah,
thing you're going
for
to need
that
too is some kind
one.
of a torque wrench. Just like rifle scopes, cars have specific torque values on bolts. Many bolts. A lot of the
How do you know what
Your
that
torque
is?
specs.
service manual.
Service manual.
Service manual
Okay.
has all
You'll
the
want
torque
to dig
specs.
that out of the trash.
You can
Mark.
always call up too if you're friends.
I couldn't tell you if I've got it in my truck. I'd assume it's in there. I don't know.
What?
Service manual?
Oh no, that's not going to come with the car.
Oh, that's extra?
That's your owner's manual that comes with the car. That
After you,
has like
Marco.
that doesn't have any torque specs in it. The owner's manual expects
how
that you
flexible
are
you
going to
are.
just take it to the dealership
Oh.
when stuff
Oh.
needs
Tripped
working
on the
on.
nuts.
Should have labeled
Don't
those.
worry about it. I already know it's a mess. The owner's manual expects you're just going to take it to the dealership for everything.
So is that an extra purchase then?
yes,
Oh, okay.
the service
Look at
manual.
these.
The service manual.
That's so old school.
Yeah, I need to. Those are not the right springs. Just
yeah,
just
I
put that
could
away.
tell.
It's embarrassing. That was
Okay.
one of my mistakes.
Whoops.
Cover it
Yeah,
up.
don't look at
Stop
that.
showing it. This is a service manual right here.
Okay.
Oh, geez, it's a freaking
Doesn't look like your owner's manual.
encyclopedia.
No, it's different.
So yeah, but that has everything in it. That can literally tell you how to take the whole car apart and put it all back together. Here we have just like a bunch of randoms. I mean,
Let's show the
everything's-
cool tires. Can we?
We should show our tires. Yeah.
Hey,
so
that does look like a solar
on.
we have a
Actually,
skid plate too.
That's a
It's
solar
important to get a skid plate.
panel. Okay, these always freak me out. Have you seen those videos of people putting them down and they like poof?
No,
No.
I haven't.
I'm gonna find them. You
What are you
keep
talking
talking.
about?
I'm
Well,
gonna find
anyway,
'em.
here's our wheels and tires. We got ourselves a set of General Grabber AT2 tires. These are larger than the OEM spec tire for this vehicle, but we were able to fit bigger tires underneath thanks to our lift kit. So the 2-inch lift kit gives us more ground clearance, and also the bigger tires are going to give us a little bit more ground clearance too.
Jim, how much ground clearance are we going to have? Because I remember, and I love my 150, Erik, by the way.
Yeah.
Love it. But how much ground clearance are we going to have? And when you were talking about what we're going to have, It's got a lot.
Oh, we'll be riding a little bit higher than your 150. I think we're gonna have somewhere near 11 inches of ground clearance,
Fantastic.
which is pretty dang good. I mean, almost a foot of ground clearance is not bad, not bad at all. So pretty knobby though, pretty aggressive tire. We didn't want to go too crazy, obviously, because we do have to drive on the highway all the way down to Arizona. And I think I've mentioned that before too, but like that is part of the reason why we have so many new parts going into this vehicle, because we didn't want to find ourselves stranded going down to this hunt. So
Especially not in Nebraska.
no, not there of all places. Anyway,
Nebraska.
all right, Eric, I
That's
set
the
it down. It
worst
didn't
place
poof.
I could think of.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Over here,
Wink, wink.
here's the engine bay. Obviously, no engine in it now, but as soon as what is Eric? What are you
there.
doing?
Keep going. I'm getting through the ads.
This is a
This
distraction.
is the thing. Nope. It's
Okay.
a relevant topic.
At the engine bay, though, this like I said was probably one of the most exciting parts for me. Being able to take out an engine, I love seeing how everything comes together. Crazy to think that engineers, so many different people, designed all this stuff to actually work in conjunction with one another. But you start looking inside the engine bay, and this is where I had that sort of moment that I did. All right, what is this?
Oh no! How do you rewind? Boom!
Oh goodness.
Jiminy Christmas.
fine.
that's
He
terrible.
lived.
Oh, he's fine. He just looks like he got
you
rocked
checked
by
up
like.
on him. You visited him at the hospital.
Yeah. Okay, Eric just showed us a video of a guy with a tire popping in his face. But this is where I had kind of my first sort of moment where I was like, wow,
Right.
I can do this myself. But as you look into this engine bay, or it's even just kind of fascinating to do, but you look at it and you think to yourself, okay, remember like I was saying, steering wheel?
Right.
Steering wheel is in the side of the car right there. And coming out here out of the firewall is this linkage thing, and it goes down into this shaft here, and then you kind of figure, and that connects to the tie rods and whatnot. That is the steering rack, and those are the steering tie rods that go to the spindle. And then you look in here, and you're like, well, the transmission bolts up to the back of the engine, so that's the transmission, and that's the bell housing of the transmission. And this thing that I pulled off of the back of the transmission that was kind of going into the engine bay, this is the starter motor. And the starter motor
yeah.
is just a little guy, and it has this tiny little gear on it, and that gear indexes up against your flywheel on the back of the engine, which we still have to put on the back of our engine.
I saw that thing is labeled flywheel right
yeah,
there.
flywheel bolts right over there.
Oh, okay.
But then when you start up the car, this thing gets an electric kick, so this is your little tiny electric motor.
Little bump.
But anyway, it starts moving the flywheel, and then the car gets going. And the crazy thing about cars, this is something I try and tell, and every time I've told it to people, I don't think they quite are as fascinated as I am about it.
Yeah.
But when you look at
Be prepared for the same reaction.
when you look at an engine, in your crankshaft, you have pistons that are moving up and down, and they're moving the crankshaft. The crankshaft is connected to a timing belt, which is spinning, right? And it's also connected out to your cams, and your cams are the gears that open and close the valves and the intake and exhaust valves. Engines are also like grills. Like, when you give a grill, like a charcoal grill, more oxygen, it burns hotter.
I thought you said girls.
Grills.
Drills.
If you give an engine more
Right out of the
oxygen,
gutter.
it'll burn better, right? So as
Yeah.
you open up the intakes more, you let more air into
Yep.
the engine, it starts burning better, all that stuff. Anyway, but the whole engine, and this is where I start, I think I just get so scatterbrained that people can't even tell what I'm talking about. The engine runs itself. Once it gets moving, it's running itself. I know that's where it's just kind of like, how did you arrive at that conclusion? But there's a crankshaft.
And that's how we found out the moon is made of cheese.
That's
Yes.
when the machines take over.
There's a crankshaft moving by way of pistons moving it. The pistons are being moved by a spark igniting a gas and air mixture, and that spark comes from the gas and air mixture that's coming out of the intake manifold and an intake valve opening and fuel injection coming in. And then as that piston goes down, it pushes exhaust valves out. Then the exhaust valve opens up and it allows the exhaust to come out. All that stuff is happening because the cam gears are moving. The cam gears are moving because the timing belt is moving them. The timing belt is moving because the crankshaft is moving them. And the crankshaft is moving because the pistons is moving the crankshaft. The pistons are moving because the intakes are opening and closing and allowing gas and air mixture and spark plug to ignite. But that's all happening because the cams are... So, see how it's like a endless
very
cycle?
circular.
Everything is happening because everything
a
else is
circle.
working.
A circle. Not
It's
the
the circle
triangle,
of life.
but the circle.
Thank you.
Name that movie. But you can't.
I can't.
I got to
don't know
calm
that
down
one.
now.
You're excited in a good way.
That always gets me excited. Anyway, We have air conditioning, compressor.
Did it come with the
steering
bungee
wheel
cords?
pump. No, the engine doesn't come with bungee cords to hold all that stuff in place. But I don't know. Just once you see it, though, it's really neat. You can kind of get inside the engineers' minds a little bit. You know, you look at just like when I push on the clutch, it moves this fluid through this line here, which then pushes on this slave cylinder, which makes this little rod pop out, and then it makes that thing move forward. Normally, it's on a spring. But then it pushes your throw-out bearing and a bunch of other stuff moves around, and I don't know. It's pretty sweet when you actually see it.
It is
in real
fascinating.
life.
It's like
I still don't get it, but
Yeah.
it's fascinating.
Yeah, I don't understand how somebody came up with it, but now that they did come up with it, I enjoy understanding what they came up with.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. There you have it. But we are very close. I'm not kidding you guys. I know the thing with cars is that it always looks like you are miles from ever getting done. And then one day, one full day on the car will happen, and next thing you know, it's like on its own wheels and the engine's bolted back up and you're ready to go. So we have basically everything we need here. The engine's just about ready to go back in. Got to put the flywheel and the clutch on the engine. Couple more bolts to tighten. We're going to throw this bad boy in there, connect it up to the transmission, and crank her over and see if she starts.
Jim, you know...
Fingers crossed.
I mean, there's some other stuff in there too, but we're going to...
You know what part I hope we don't use that you keep talking about?
The recovery gear?
That could
too.
get interesting. I was going to say the firewall. I'm really just... as long as we don't use the firewall, I think we'll be good.
Oh.
Ricky
Yeah.
Bobby's on fire.
Yeah.
Speaking of the roof
stoked.
rack, Jim, that thing was not that expensive, and that's going to allow us to hold a lot
amazed.
more
Hey,
gear.
yeah, shout out to Cabela's. They're selling a $120 roof rack that is like a 70-inch long roof rack.
No way.
I was
Put all
amazed.
sorts of stuff up there, all the stuff I pack.
Yeah. Your stuff goes on top.
Yeah.
All of our stuff goes inside. Whew. That's it. Like I said,
Wow, Jim.
This weekend's going to be big. I feel like you guys are going to come back after today being a Friday, come back on Monday, and you're just going to be like wondering what happened, because this thing will be very close to done, if not done.
I can't wait.
That's unreal.
Nice work,
Stoked.
Jim.
And hey, Mark, here's
Yeah.
a little thing for you. I found
Oh, yeah, what's that?
spider.
Oh, another giant one?
Well,
Or is
does that look like the one that you saw that one time when you made Eric and I strip down to our skivvies because you thought we got
Yeah, probably. It looks
bit
pretty
by
similar.
a brown recluse?
Yeah.
I found that the other day though because
Was
I
he
had
alive or dead?
dead. But I had
Dude,
we
is
had all
that
of our
him?
stuff.
Is that the OG one that, like, how long has this cardboard been here?
No,
that's
that
a
one
new
was
piece
in
card. This
pieces.
cardboard's been here
once
forever
it
because I
was
had all the
done.
engine parts laying out here, and I pulled one up and I went, "Ugh!"
I was just trying to protect you guys.
You just wanted
yeah.
to
It
see
was
us in our
big.
underwear.
It was weird
it was
how
fast.
by trying to
Weirdo.
protect
And
us,
it was
the first
under
thing
you
you
in an
said was
instant.
take off all your clothes.
Sounds like a Nelly
That's
song.
my...
There's a spider in here. Take your clothes off.
Whoop, kicking around our starter motor. Anyway, I
think
got
I
parts
learned
everywhere.
something.
I got a lot of cleanup to
We'll
do.
take it to the clubs.
Yeah.
There you have it.
That's
Great
it.
work, Jim.
Thank you. And Ryan says, next episode, MC Ryan almost,
Keeping us on track.
oh man, almost forgot, folks. As usual, this is a podventure, so there will be more episodes. Next up, though, it's not enough to just get there. The Subaru is going to help us get there and establish a base camp. We actually have to be able to shoot one of these bad boys if we see one. And in order to do that with our bows and in Coues deer country, it may be a bit of a long poke. So stay tuned
Like a really long.
for more on this podventure. All right, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Vortex Nation podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hit that subscribe button so you can always stay up to date on the latest happenings over here at the Vortex Nation podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at Vortex Nation Podcast. Again, everybody, thanks, and happy hunting and shooting. We appreciate it. Have a good one.